Okay, hello everyone. I'm here with my good friend Barrie Sargeant, who I've known for a little while now, and he is an anarchist, and we're going to be talking about things today and where we see the world and where Barrie has come from. So welcome, Barrie.
Thank you.
All right. I guess we'll start at the beginning, if you don't mind. How did you get into thinking and caring about the world and starting you on your journey towards anarchism?
Boy, big question.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I suppose. Well, could I start really? I guess by maybe offering a definition of what it actually is.
Yes.
First.
Okay.
Because
sure.
I think it's one of those political words that is so easily misunderstood. Or deliberately given the wrong way.
Yes.
So what I'll do, I'll start off, I'll give you a definition of what I see it as being, and then maybe unpack that a little bit.
Awesome, thank you.
Just to explain it. Good choice of words there, awesome. That's the group I'm in.
Yes.
I like that.
We'll get to that later.
We'll get to that
Barrie
later,
has some propaganda and merchandise for that. Okay, carry on, my friend.
Okay. So, usually you hear anarchy, it's used basically as a synonym for chaos, and it isn't. It's a political theory. Which basically advocates the establishment of society or societies which are founded on relationships which political, economic and social relationships which are non-hierarchical, non-exploitative, and therefore by implication truly democratic and equal. I say it's political because I think a lot of people have the idea that it's not. It's just about a bunch of people just running wild. But I take politics to be answering questions about the use of power in a society. Fundamentally, every kind of politics addresses that question.
Yes.
And anarchism does it in this particular way. And I'd say it's a theory rather than say an ideology, in that I see it as being more flexible. Okay. An ideology, as I see it, is very rigid and fixed. And I think anarchism has the advantage, although it is an ism, it has the advantage of, over time, being quite adaptable.
Right.
And that's why it's probably been around quite a long time, really.
Yeah. Just to capture that point. You speak of an ism, and like often people are wary of isms. So,
sure.
So how does that come into what you do and feel?
Well, I don't have too much of a problem with it as long as it's understood, and that's why I think you have to define.
Yes.
Correctly.
Yes.
When you're talking about political terms,
Yes.
I don't. Well, I do have a problem with people who disagree with me, but
yes.
I at least prefer that they would disagree with me about what it really is.
Yes.
Instead of starting a conversation by saying, "Hey, why do you anarchists love chaos?" I'm like, "Well, we don't. We're not actually about that."
That's right.
If they said more, well, could it really work, or how come you want that kind of thing, and there's this problem or that problem. Okay, now we're arguing
without making incorrect assumptions.
That's right. I don't mind having an argument about what really is. And that's why I think it's so important to define some of those terms in the way that I just did.
Excellent.
So that it doesn't lead to misunderstandings and so on, and a whole lot of time wasted,
Yes.
So that's basically how I see anarchism. It's a political movement. It addresses questions of power and legitimate use of it in society, in terms of economics and socially, and politics in the broadest sense of the word. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And how did you come to see that there was an imbalance or inequality in society?
Yeah, I guess it was a combination. Two things of, if you like, the theoretical through reading.
Yes.
I guess I started reading books when I was young,
Yeah.
combined with personal experience,
right.
And the two together. I think I would have been at high school, so this is going back to the 80s, and it gives my age away a bit. And I was reading, explicitly political stuff. I guess somehow I just knew that was something that interested me from when I was quite young, and other things weren't interesting. And so I remember when I was about 16, reading John Stuart Mill
Right.
on liberty. And I'm not saying I understood it, of course, completely.
But something obviously struck a chord.
Yeah, and so, I was reading various political books. I had a teacher who was quite sympathetic to me being able to explore different things rather than just do what the school insisted I had to do.
Right.
And so I used to spend a lot of time in the back of the class doing my own thing, but I saw it as constructive because I was reading political stuff. So on the one hand, it was through reading things, but so when I was about 16, I read this classical liberal stuff,
Yes.
John Stuart Mill, Bentham, and that kind of thing. And simultaneously with that, which is where the experience side of it comes in, I remember there was a Christian group that wanted to hold meetings at the school that I was at. And as an adjunct to the sort of classic liberal ideas, I was into looking at atheism and agnosticism, humanism, that kind of thing. And so to me, I'd reached the way of thinking after a while that I've got a problem with a Christian group coming into a state school, and there's that classic thing of separation of church and state.
Yes.
So I somewhat naively, in retrospect, thought, well, if I just went and very politely complained to the correct authorities, something would be done about this, So I remember going to, and with the support of that teacher that I mentioned, in the background anyway, I think I spoke to various people at the principal as well and stuff. And basically it came back to me that these people were allowed to have their meeting because they'd found a loophole in the timetable where if they had their meeting at lunchtime, it's technically wasn't really in school time sort of thing. And to me that didn't seem right. And then I did come across some anarchist books at the time. I think it would have been the classic ones, Kropotkin or Bakunin.
Yes.
And I suddenly thought, well, why do I really need to have their permission or their authority to do the things that I wanted to do and so on. And so I sort of rebelled against the school uniform. I refused to wear it. And at one point, one of my little antics was we had a corridor leading up to the assembly, and everyone else would go to assembly and I'd stay behind and tack onto the notice board all sorts of random bits of political propaganda and anti-religious stuff, or just fun things that I'd come across, and staple them to the board without asking for permission to do it. And then the caretaker would get quite angry because he'd have to rip it all down. So there became this sort of like ongoing little battle where I'd leave class and go and tack up some stuff, and then he'd take it down, and it got a bit out of
wheels.
It did. And
how did the authority figures in the school respond to you and your rebellion?
Well, eventually what happened is I chained myself up to outside the principal's office with a bike chain, and just as a protest thing,
Yes.
And he basically called my mother in, and he said, according to my mother, he said, I don't really know how to deal with a kid like this. I've never really had this before, because I was absolutely intransigent at this point. I was not backing down no matter what. And, and I got into all sorts of different scrapes and things, and some of it was a bit silly, but some of it did have a sensible political basis to it, and I didn't get expelled, but I did appallingly academically by that point, having done quite well previously. So it's interesting. You always pay a price for your politics when you step outside the rule. So there was this sort of running battle going on, and then eventually I moved to another city, and it sort of died down a bit that way. But it had sparked my interest, and what happened specifically with the anarchist thing is we had a school trip, and it was so random. We were going to this other city. We were walking along the street, and there was a sticker on a lamppost, and it was for an anarchist magazine.
Oh, right.
In New Zealand, of all things, And I jotted down the pre-internet, of course. I jotted down the details and contacted them, and then started receiving this magazine every month or week or whatever it was.
And how was that for a young Barrie who was starting to be politically aware?
Oh, it was great, because I think what you've got to remember is, the the political climate in the 80s in terms of the spectrum of what was out there.
Yeah.
You know, because okay, you've got the mainstream politics, and it was just National and Labour, and that was these blocks.
Yeah.
But even if you look at the more, you know, inverted commas, radical side of the spectrum,
Yeah.
it was very much sewn up by these hardcore Leninist groups.
Right.
At a time when the Soviet Union was still existed and still was powerful, you know, and they practically dominated the left at that
Yes.
time. You know, you had the SUP in union positions.
Yes.
The Communist Party was around. You know, the Socialist Action League had a bookshop in Wellington, which I thought was very impressive. Didn't agree with the politics, but that was impressive.
Yes.
And I remember at that time encountering these people, and if you mentioned you're an anarchist, you actually got laughed at.
So it was actual laughter.
Yeah, they just could not believe that anyone could be. It was just ridiculous because they had conquered the left as far as they were concerned.
So they thought there was no space for
No, they thought it was
what you guys believe.
No, they thought it was ridiculous, you know. So to actually come across a magazine that was an anarchist magazine when we had no resources and no infrastructure and barely any, you know, there were hardly any of us at all. To me, that was great. It was, I was going to say a godsend.
That's another story, isn't it?
No, that's
Yeah.
But it was fantastic to contact others who felt the same way I did. And, you know, to actually be in contact with them and stuff. So it was quite something, you know.
Brilliant.
And then I went off to university and sort of met some of the people that I corresponded with through the magazine. Who were around in Wellington. That's where I was at the time.
So there are a lot of students involved in that.
Yeah, there were some.
group.
There were some students there. You know, not I wouldn't say predominantly students, but there were some students. Yeah.
Enough for you to start a dialogue and
Yeah, and we could have little meetings and things up at the university and make contacts with people, and yeah, it was very, very tenuous. You know, not many of us, like I said, no resources, but just for me, it just kept the spark going. I didn't feel like the village freak. You know? Whereas,
there were others.
You know, there were others
like you.
also afflicted.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think it's sort of opened up a lot more. You know, once the Soviet Union did fall, and then you know, as the 90s took off, anarchism really exploded. You know, in terms of people getting involved and stuff, and it became
so what
a lot
were some
more
seminal moments that you remember?
What for me personally?
In the 90s, as you say, the movement exploded.
I guess for me personally, like one experience I had was going to Australia.
Yes.
And I stayed at a bookshop, an anarchist bookshop called Euro Books or Jura Books, and I was there for about a month.
Yeah.
Now that was my first time where I'd actually come across not just other anarchists, but they actually had a bookshop.
Yes.
You know, that was really a big step up at the time.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, you know, and it had been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was a living example of something that was operating along anarchist lines.
Yes.
Non-hierarchical, where people could participate as equals and that sort of thing. So that, you know, it wasn't just theoretical, it wasn't just me and a couple of mates. It was like, wow, you know, this really can operate, it does work, you know.
Yeah.
So that was quite a good thing for me personally. I quite enjoyed that, but
oh, cool.
I suppose over the years I participated in all sorts of different demos and things going on, and every now and then things would happen that would make me sort of think. For example, the role of the media.
Yes.
I remember going to one
Very
demo. I remember going to one demo in Wellington.
Yeah.
And at the time, I can't remember if it was the Labour government or the National. There's not much difference. I can't really remember. But they were talking about buying frigates for the Navy. You see.
Ah, okay.
And I didn't even know this particular demo was on. I just wandered. I was wandering along, and it was outside Parliament.
Yeah.
Oh, what's going on there? You know. And the crowd consisted mostly, it seemed, of office workers. You know, people wearing suits and fairly mainstream-looking people. And they had a podium up there, and various speakers got up to stand. And again, there was a real cross-section of speakers. They had a naval officer in full uniform.
Oh, wow.
Who said, no, this is not a good idea, for whatever his own reasons were. they had a union official who said, my members will not benefit from this and that.
Yes.
And they had some people from the peace movement, but quite a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple of people in the crowd, way off in the distance, who were dressed as full-on hippies with placards and beads in the hair and the whole thing. And I watched all this, and I took it all in and just looked around. And then I went home and watched the 6 o'clock news, and it was really interesting because they had basically filtered out, like the naval officer wasn't in it, the union official wasn't in it.
Yeah.
And when they panned the crowd, they zeroed in on the two hippies, you see. Yeah. And they only had the people from the peace movement and all this sort of thing. So it gave a really skewed perspective on what this demo had been. Yeah. Which it had been, from my point of view, a fairly mainstream thing. Right. But because of just the way they'd framed it and edited it, I thought it almost didn't feel like this thing that I'd been to. Yeah. And I thought, wow. Right. And that's where I became really interested in what the media can do about it. So, later on, when, getting back to the anarchist thing, where it got onto like a mass scale of protest in places like Seattle or some of the stuff going on in Europe around the G20 and that sort of thing. Oh, yes. You see it. And they tend to show people, black bloc people, wearing masks, throwing Molotovs, which happens, But, you sort of, if you've actually been there, and then you contrast it with, what happened, with what you see. Yes. I had the same thing. I went on the May Day demo in London in 1999, which, got a little bit out of hand, like some shops got ransacked and stuff, and, that got on the media. And that, again, the way that one was portrayed, I was only a few meters away from that when that was going on. Yeah. And that was part of what happened, but you had literally thousands and thousands of people there who weren't doing that. And I'm not saying I'm actually against what they did necessarily. I mean, I don't really care, Yeah. But it was only part of the story. Yeah, it was just part of it, and I found that quite interesting. Sometimes that sort of thing, you get very skewed views. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for that background. So how does that translate into what you've been doing in more recent years and what you believe now about society in New Zealand and maybe more widely?
Ooh, well, I guess one thing just on a personal level, I used to read a lot. Yes. And I used to read a lot of theory stuff and all that sort of thing. And that's important and it's necessary, but I think more and more over time, I've come round to my views, which they've consolidated. I haven't really changed that much, I think, since I was like 16. But it's being based a lot more now on my own personal experiences. Gotcha. Like one of the things I often, as a thought experiment, is people say, oh, we live in a democracy and that sort of thing, and like, for example, I don't participate in elections and so on. And every now and then people wonder, oh, why not?
Say more about that?
Yeah, well, there's different ways of approaching it. I mean, I've never voted or whatever it is. And just my personal reason for it is that I wake up every day in a world and an economic system, social system, that I don't just a little bit dislike. I think it's fundamentally set up the wrong way. It's anti-democratic. It's exploitative of people, and simply to survive in it, myself and other people have to compromise with it, all the time. To me, when you get an election, it's the one time where you can actually say back to the system, no, on this one time, I'm not playing your game. I'm not joining your circus. I'm going to put my energy into something else. You know. But you do have to compromise a lot of the time. Yes. But one little thought experiment I give to people is I say, okay, we live in a democracy, do we? Think about if you're working, and that's an interesting thing. If you're working, look at your workplace and imagine it's a country. Right. That office, that building, that whatever it is, that is its own little country. Okay. Now, if you were asked to describe the political system that operates in that country, would it look like a democracy? And they don't.
No.
What you tend to get is you've got a very small elite, which is unelected,
Yes.
or or unaccountable, which is more important.
Right.
Who basically tell other people what to do,
Yes.
when they have to start work. Sometimes if you wear a uniform, what shift you're going to do, how much money you're going to get paid, when you can go to the freaking toilet, when you can eat. The list goes on and on and on.
So managed.
It
life.
actually represents much more of a dictatorship.
Right.
And it comes back to that definition that I was given of politics. It's not just that formal thing about what goes on in Parliament or being able to vote for somebody who's going to tell you what to do. Our daily lives, for a lot of people, in order to live, we have to sell our labor and exist in a place for, say, 6, 8, 9, 12 hours a day, which, if it was a country, you would want to get the hell out of. But, it's a dictatorship.
Okay.
And you multiply that out over thousands of places. Where's your democracy now? And that's where I think anarchism is strong, because it sees politics in that wider sense of social relationships, economic relationships. That's the politics of it.
Okay. Right.
And myself, I'm no different to anyone else in general. I have worked in places that are like that, that are dictatorships. Now, of course, there's a spectrum. Some can be better than others.
Sure.
You get a longer lunch break, or
Yes.
every now and then you might get a pay increase or whatever it is. But the fundamentals, it is what it is.
Yes. Okay.
And anarchism says it doesn't have to be. That we could actually run those places democratically, and everybody would get an equal say in what goes on. Everyone would own everything equally.
Yes.
And that to me seems like a lot more of a healthier objective to aim towards, to build towards. And we don't have to accept it as it is.
Right. Okay, so that leads us into, you mentioned you're part of a group. So tell us about that group and how you
Sure.
aim to counter that dictatorship system that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, it's called Awesome, and that's an acronym, of course.
Yes. What does it stand for?
Well, it stands for Aotearoa Workers Solidarity Movement.
Okay.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
Do you have that?
Oh, I've got.
Yes. So yeah, there's a website, guys.
There's a website.
So anyone who's been listening to the interview, please check out Awesome's
Awesome.
website. Yeah. And yeah. So tell us more about Awesome.
Well, Awesome. To be honest, internally we had some disagreements about the name.
Okay.
Some people don't like it. I think it's quite fitting myself. Aotearoa, that's where we are.
Yes.
Workers, that's what we are.
Yeah.
Solidarity is what we do.
Yes.
Solidarity meaning supporting people, supporting workers.
Yeah.
A movement, that one's a bit more problematic. I think we're not there yet. It's more aspirational.
Yes. So that's your aim.
Yeah, but you look at other groups that have existed in the past or presently. They were the same. Like for example, the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World,
Yes.
which were active primarily about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
They weren't all industrial workers, and they weren't everywhere in the world. But okay,
Was it a conscious effort conscious choice to leave anarchism out of the name entirely, or
I think there was some debate around that, possibly
because that's
putting
primarily
people off
where your
maybe, or-
ideology is?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. I was there from the beginning, but of the group, but I can't remember. I think we probably had a long list of different combinations, and and that's what we came up
The
with.
acronym sounds
Yeah, the acronym. There's a group in Ireland called the Workers Solidarity Movement.
Okay.
One of the people who founded the group, who's no longer with us actually, really was very impressed with them, I think, and we just tacked on. And that's how it came.
Yes.
Anyway, it's obviously an anarchist group. It's a group that has a particular form of anarchism. As I said at the start, it's theory rather than ideology, so that allows for lots of variation and thinking and coming up against actual experience in the world. You adapt. So we're very much aligned with a form of anarchism called platformism,
Okay.
which sounds like
explain
we're
that a
waiting
little
for a
bit?
train, doesn't it? We're standing here on the platform.
Feels like life sometimes.
Yeah, the train of history passes us by. Or whatever. Yeah.
But for you, what is platformism?
For
our members?
Yeah, sure. It's a form of anarchism that came up after the experiences of anarchists in Russia and the Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if people are aware, but there was a major revolution in Russia and the Ukraine between about 1917 and 1921, which anarchists participated in.
Civil War period.
Civil War and so on. And it's quite a sort of a complex period, like any civil war. But basically, you had the anarchists in the Ukraine who liberated a very large swathe of land.
Yes.
And fought against the Bolsheviks and against the whites who wanted to restore the monarchy and so on. And also the nationalists. There were Ukrainian nationalists and the Germans as well.
Yeah.
They lost, of course, in the end. When they went into exile, they had a lot of discussion and argument about things. And then in 1926, I think it was, they produced this document they called The Platform. The gist of it is that they wanted to learn the lessons of what had gone wrong, and they thought that they needed a lot tighter, more organized form of anarchism to resolve. If you like, there's this basic division between what you might call synthesist anarchism, where, let's say someone decides they want to set up an anarchist group, right?
Okay.
And they put up a poster or a Facebook thing or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Every anarchist welcome.
Yeah.
So a whole bunch of people get into a room, and have a meeting, and let's set up an anarchist group. And we all call ourselves anarchists. And I've actually experienced this, is why I ended up the way in the group that I have.
Yeah.
Where you start to delve into it, and then you realize that, in fact, you really do see things really differently. Anarchists love hyphens. You know? You'll have anarcho-greens, anarcho-feminists,
I've noticed that.
Anarcho-syndicalists, anarcho-communists, and you would think that being anarchist in itself would help, but you end up spending such a long time arguing about basic stuff like, do we decide things by consensus or by vote? And then if we do it by that, how? And da-da-da-da-da, and, you might find that some people, for example, don't have an analysis of current society based on class.
Okay.
Or they don't emphasize, or they don't think it's important, but others do.
Yeah.
And so, if you lack that cohesion, it's very difficult, particularly with small numbers as well. That you can be effective.
Right.
So platformism argues that you need tactical unity within the group. That we all decide pretty much how we want to approach things. Collective responsibility, federalism, theoretical unity, that we all pretty much agree that this is what we want to do. Of course, you're still going to have disagreements within that.
Yes.
But instead of like having a bunch of individuals who are all sort of like going their own directions and stuff, being much more organized, much more unified, and therefore theoretically much more effective.
Yes.
So Awesome is a platformist group. There are platformist groups in other parts of the world too, which are obviously bigger and been around longer and stuff like that. So at the moment, current state of play, we're going through a period of regroupment because we've actually reduced in size, to be totally honest. But that happens, swings and roundabouts, ups and downs.
Yes.
So what we're doing at the moment is I think we're emphasizing propaganda more. And just getting the message out there that we exist, and that there is an alternative to the mainstream view of politics. That it's not about electing politicians to run our lives for us. It's about us. We can do it ourselves. We can run our workplaces. We can make our decisions for ourselves. We should own the means of production and distribution and so on. And that we don't have to put up with things the way they are. So it's about letting people know how that could work, and then over time, building that up.
Yes.
That's where we're at the moment. Okay. Because people don't really know what we're about.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. People have a misconception about anarchy and chaos and
And when you think about that, who benefits from that misconception, the powers that be?
Yes.
you know, it's
status quo.
The status quo, you know,
Yes.
like they're quite happy to put those pictures on, like
Yeah.
I said about the media, and
Yes.
you know, and people use the word anarchy to mean chaos and da da da.
Yeah.
Well, you know, who's going to benefit from that, you know? So,
Yes.
I mean, some people sometimes say, "Oh, why don't you just abandon the description altogether?" But I don't want to leave the field open to the enemy, you know.
Yes.
Like because it is a, you know, it is a proud and good theory. It is good politics, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not about you know, it's not about chaos. It's not about not having rules.
Mhm.
It's about not having rulers,
Right.
in the sense of having a permanent caste or class of rich people or powerful people telling the rest of us what to do. You know, so we're fully in favour of having rules in society,
Yeah.
but there's self-managed and self-chosen
Yeah.
rules that we've determined for ourselves democratically at a grassroots level
Yeah.
in society. You
So
know?
that leads us quite neatly into talking about what would your ideal anarchist society look like.
Well, I think the first thing to say there is, you know, you've got to be realistic.
Yeah.
I think personally, this is just my personal opinion, you know, you're not going to get a perfect anything in terms of a society. You do need to have some sort of, as you're saying, you know, like a perfect vision, a model,
Yes. Yes.
in order to judge where you're at now in comparison to that. You know, like
Right.
how close are we to it?
Yeah.
And you know, you look at every theory or ideology, like capitalism or I don't like using it, but communism that used to exist has that as well. You know,
Yeah.
you've got this beautiful, you know, rivers of chocolate and fountains
Yes.
of lemonade version of capitalism, which
Yes.
you know is you know falls way short of that.
Yes.
Of that, right? You know, lots of
Guaranteed,
starving
yes.
people in the world and all
That's
that kind
right.
of thing. So yeah, I'd say that I could do that. I could give you some views of it, but I am realistic that it might not happen, that it has to be struggled for, and so on. But basically, we're talking about a world in which you don't have huge disparities economically, that people are basically on an equal level, equal playing field economically, that all the basics of life are catered for without huge, you know, wealth imbalances. And again, the same thing in terms of who has power. Everybody in society, again, being more or less equal and having a say in how things get done,
Cool.
and ownership and control of what's produced and how it's produced. You know, so going back to that that example I gave, you know, if you have a workplace of some kind, that everybody in that workplace would basically own it,
Yeah.
have say about what's going to be produced, how and when, and
Yes.
who for, and so on. But you also have to realize that that involves a very decentralized economy.
Surely.
Okay, so you'd need a more federal, if you like, approach, in the sense that you're not isolated. You know, we're not living in
Not
some
work
little-
units alone.
No, you've got to have some sort of contact with others on a broader regional level. Maybe
Yes.
it's not always geographical.
For
So-
logistics as well as...
Yeah, that's right, for
Yeah.
logistics and so on. But you would be doing it with others who have operating their places in the same sort of way.
Right.
You know, so a society that's non-hierarchical, it goes outwards in that way, with lots
Yeah.
of these workplaces that owned and operated by the people in them, really. And we wouldn't have a parliament in the sense that we do now.
Yeah.
Basically, what you'd probably do is you'd have people who are delegates,
Okay.
who are mandated and recallable. So what that means is your workplace chooses somebody who thinks competent
Yeah.
to represent you, okay, for a particular purpose
Yes.
only. They have no power of their own to do anything.
Okay.
So unlike now, where you know, 30, 40, 20,000 people
Yeah.
vote for somebody in an election, send
Yeah.
them to Parliament,
Yeah.
and then they just do whatever the hell they like, pretty much.
Once
and
they're
there's-
there.
once they're there,
Yeah.
on all sorts of different issues, you've got really virtually no control over them
While they're there.
while they're there,
Yeah.
right? In this case, you've got an individual who goes to, say, maybe a regional a meeting
Yes.
of other people who've been sent there to do the job that you've sent them there for only.
For example, allocating resources
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
greater good.
That's right.
Okay.
And they're recallable so that if you don't know what they're doing, you yank them out
How would
straight
that
away.
happen?
Well,
Because technically, in our society, those people are recallable too, but in reality, it's
yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, they're recallable in the sense that, once every 3 or 4 years, you get to choose someone else who'll also do the same thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I mean, the first point about it is it has to be admitted that any system is open to, to corruption and mistakes and that
yes.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
You could send the wrong person there and it goes to their head or whatever.
Yes.
That can happen. But one safeguard against that is the fact that participation in the society is voluntary.
Right.
And I think that's been shown to some extent in historical examples. For example, the Spanish Civil War,
Yes.
which started in 1936 and ran through to 1939,
Yeah.
had a large number of anarchists involved in it. And in the areas where the anarchists predominated,
Yeah.
if they had individuals who didn't want to participate in those collective economic arrangements, they're pretty much left to their own devices, as long as they didn't hire other people and exploit them.
Yeah.
The landlords and the landowners who had been exploiting people, if they were still around, they were quite often shot. But
Yes.
they're exploiters who died in the war and are not going to convert, sort of thing. What are you going to do?
Okay.
So I think the fact that people participate voluntarily in the economy, goes
Keep
a long
going.
way to
Yeah.
to avoiding that.
Yeah. Okay.
We all good?
Yes, we're all good. Keep going. I'm just checking everything is
That's
all right.
right.
Yes.
So that's basically how it operates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So awesome. In New Zealand, what's the next step if you get recruits and you're a big, robust organisation? What would you like to see happen as the next stage?
Obviously,
To see that,
yeah, ideally, I mean,
yeah.
wouldn't
But there's always a step.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, one thing again, coming back to the idea that it's a theory rather than a rigid thing, is you've got to adapt to the realities of what's around you and what could happen.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily predict the future. All you can do is point to trends that things seem to be heading in a direction that's favourable towards you. But ideally, it would be great if the whole of New Zealand turned into an anarchist society, or at least zones of it did, so that you had active areas active examples of it happening.
Yeah.
Which on a small scale we do. There's a bookshop in Wellington called Freedom Books, which has been going,
Yes.
I think, about 30 years.
Well-known
which
example.
which is run along anarchist lines. It's democratic,
It's a collective.
joint control, it's collective, and so on. People have got different things, little projects going on around the place. So it's just about making people aware of that, broadening it as much as possible. There is a question, of course, about how much this would involve, say, a violent struggle with the established status quo in order
Right.
to get the breathing space for this to happen. Wouldn't it be nice, really, if society just evolved nice and smoothly?
That would be the
quietly,
ideal.
Well, I mean, in some ways, there is this thing that every system creates the seeds of its own destruction or its own gravedigger. Certainly, in a way, there are elements within society that prefigure what an anarchist society could do. For example, again, if you come back to workplaces, I think approximately 89% of the workplaces in New Zealand have 20 workers or less.
Yes.
Now, surely, if you've only got 20 people in a place, you could have a democratic economy. If the majority of your workplaces are set up that way. I think there's other things that, ironically, the fact that in the past 30 years there's been an attempt by various governments to smash unions.
Yes.
Means that we're now at a point where there's a generation that have grown up without unions. Now, you could see that negatively, but you could see that as an opportunity to say, right, introduce them to the ideas of revolutionary unions that are quite compatible with anarchist ways of doing things, and say this is what unions are.
Unions with teeth.
You know, yeah. Whereas once upon a time, as I said, when I started out, they had it all locked down on these very bureaucratic, top-down sort of controlled sort of things that were going to rock the boat too much in some ways. So
very complacent.
You know, so there could be certain things out there that the materials that could be used to go forward towards anarchist society that it might evolve into. But I think it does need people to, and this is where platformism comes in, I think, you do need people who are doing it explicitly, saying we want an anarchist society.
Yes.
You know, the idea is that anarchism becomes the majority way of thinking out there, that people trying to do it and so on, you know.
Cool.
So whether it ever happens or not, who knows?
Would you ever work with other isms or other people along with similar goals?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I think if you start from the way things are now, you have to. You just have to. You know, a lot of anarchists, not just people in Awesome, but you know, anarchists in general, here and elsewhere, are involved in various social campaigns and economic campaigns and issues that are out there.
Yes.
And you, by its nature, you will come across people who, you know, maybe they're members of the Green Party or, you know, or some other group or whatever it is, you know, and you find yourself having to work with them. Maybe not now that they're in Parliament. I don't know, the Green Party.
Yes.
But you know,
that changes the dynamic a little bit.
But you know, you're going to now. To me, that brings up the question of reforms versus reformism. And
can you explain that a little more?
Well, as I see it, yeah, I'd love to have a revolution. I'd love to have a perfect anarchist society. But as we're talking, you've got to do things along the way to get there. And if some improvements can be made in the current society with, you know, steps along the way, then yeah, we've got to work towards it. Let's be realistic. That might mean joining a campaign group or joining a union campaign or the TPPA or whatever the issue of the day is, right? But the difference is your objective that you're aiming for. There will be people there who, once that campaign's over, they're sweet with the rest of the system.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, we've improved that little bit of it.
The tweaking.
Yeah, we've tweaked this. We've done that a little bit. But basically, they're quite happy with the way things are.
But for you, never.
But, so that's reformism, as I see it. So seeking reforms is necessary, but always with the idea that you need to be, one, taking it further, and two, how you run your kaupapa, as it were, in as democratic, anarchist-compatible ways as possible.
Okay.
You know? So you can have a reform campaign that actually it can be quite, can be run by people who are not very nice and are quite authoritarian. So it's not just about getting the reform, you know, opening up the way that the group itself who wants that reform is run in an anarchist way would be good.
Right. I think we're going to have to wrap this up simply because I'm running out of power and I don't want to cut you off.
Power. It's always about power.
It's always
politics is about power.
Unless you have a PowerPoint over there.
No.
No. So
what
needs?
We can move this. We can move the tablecloths up.
No, it's all right.
No.
We'll finish up, but I'll give you a finishing plug for your group. Show their awesome card again, and give our promo to get some recruits. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it'll always be good to have recruits. I think the main thing we're looking for at the moment is people to just contribute their stories about experiences they've had in the workplace.
Of exploitation.
Oh, yeah, of bosses giving them trouble and various things, and just that sort of thing would be good.
Great.
It's always good to hear from people. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for your time today, Barry.
You're
that
welcome.
was really interesting, as always, talking to you.
You're welcome.
And we might follow it up with another session.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you enjoyed today's interview, please share it among your networks, because it's always good to have people thinking for the greater good and working for the greater good. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Great.